The hum of the global conference room went silent as the screen flickered to life. World leaders, military commanders, and key officials stared at the screen in shock. A voice echoed through the room, a voice they would never forget. "We are giving you one final warning, Earth. Do not harm our friends. The consequences will be catastrophic." It wasn't a threat. It wasn't even a demand. It was a warning wrapped in layers of urgency and solemnity. The tone was clear, yet filled with an emotion that the humans in the room couldn't comprehend: fear. The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. The room filled with nervous murmurs, some of disbelief, others tinged with anger. Humanity's response had always been to challenge the unknown, and here was something unprecedented: an alien species, reaching out not to conquer, but to protect. Yet, the chilling words left a heavy weight in the air: the consequences will be catastrophic. General Calhoun stood first, his jaw clenched, his eyes burning with frustration. "We can't allow ourselves to be intimidated. If we let them dictate our actions now, where does it end?" He slammed his fist on the table, his voice rising. "This is our planet." But Dr. Maria Lopez, an astrophysicist who had spent years studying alien phenomena, stood and quieted the room with a single word: "No." The eyes of everyone in the room turned to her, confused, waiting. "They're not bluffing," she said, her voice steady but filled with the weight of truth. "We're being warned of something much bigger than we understand. These beings, they aren't just offering protection, they're giving us the chance to survive." The world leaders exchanged uneasy glances, their minds racing to process the alien transmission. It didn't feel like an ordinary negotiation. It felt urgent. And in that moment, the true gravity of their situation began to sink in. As the hours passed, leaders from across the globe debated and argued, their voices filled with frustration, confusion, and stubborn pride. Some were inclined to dismiss the warning, calling it a ruse. Others, like Dr. Lopez, urged immediate cooperation, though her voice was drowned in the clamor of doubt and defiance. But far beyond Earth, in the cold expanse of space, a vast fleet of alien ships hovered just outside of the solar system. These weren't invaders or conquerors. They were something entirely different: guardians. Their power, however, remained unseen, wrapped in a cloak of mystery and hidden behind a subtle, yet unmistakable presence. No one knew the true nature of these aliens, nor their motives. But one thing was certain: they were watching Earth's every move. They knew humanity better than humanity knew itself. The warning was not just about protection. It was a final warning. As Earth's leaders continued to argue, an event occurred that no one could have foreseen. A rogue faction, emboldened by their belief that they had nothing to lose, launched an unprovoked attack on one of the alien ships. It was a calculated strike designed to challenge their authority and send a message to the alien visitors: Earth would not be subjugated. The attack was swift. But it was also the last mistake the rogue faction would ever make. Within seconds of the first missile launch, the alien ship activated in a way that no one on Earth could understand. It wasn't an explosion. It wasn't a counterstrike. The rogue ships disintegrated, vanishing without a trace, as if the very fabric of reality itself had been unraveled. The transmission had been clear: do not harm our friends. The consequences had begun. Humanity's first reaction was disbelief. No one had expected such a response. There were no explosions, no sounds of warfare, just the immediate and absolute destruction of the rogue faction. It was as if Earth itself had been struck by lightning from the heavens. The military was paralyzed, the world leaders stunned into silence. Dr. Lopez's eyes widened with shock, realizing that their understanding of the aliens' capabilities had been grossly underestimated. The room, once filled with debate, now stood silent in the aftermath of the rogue attack. And then, the question lingered in the air: what had humanity truly just provoked? The warning had been heard. But the aliens had only begun to show their power. This was the beginning of something much larger, much more dangerous, and much more meaningful than anyone on Earth had imagined. The aliens were not here to conquer. They were here to protect, but only if humanity could be trusted. And as the first consequences reverberated across Earth, the planet found itself on the brink of a realization: it was no longer in control. The countdown had begun. Would Earth heed the warning, or would it fall into a fate that no one could have predicted? The stakes had never been higher, and the clock was ticking. The next move was humanity's. The days following the attack were filled with confusion, fear, and whispers of a crisis no one could control. World governments scrambled to understand what had happened, and even the brightest minds struggled to comprehend the true power of the aliens. What had begun as a warning had now escalated into something more dangerous. The attack on the rogue faction was not just a show of force, it was a statement. Humanity had been put on notice. In the Oval Office, President Alexandra Turner sat at the head of a table surrounded by her advisors, military officials, and experts in alien diplomacy. The room was thick with tension as each person tried to make sense of what had just transpired. The video feeds of the rogue ship's destruction were still playing on the massive screen, their ghostly disappearance leaving an unsettling silence in their wake. "We need to respond," General Calhoun's voice was firm, the only one who didn't seem rattled by the event. "We can't just sit here and wait for them to make the next move." President Turner, her face pale but composed, met his gaze. "We don't know what their next move is. We don't even know what kind of power they used to destroy those ships." Her tone carried an edge of concern, but she was trying her best to remain in control. The shock of the attack had not worn off, and now they were all facing a larger question: what did the aliens want, and why had they chosen now to make their presence felt? The transmission wasn't just a warning. Dr. Lopez spoke up from her seat, her voice trembling slightly with a mixture of awe and fear. It was an invitation. A test. These aliens have been watching us for much longer than we've known. Their destruction of the rogue faction wasn't just about stopping them, it was a message for the rest of us. A message? Calhoun scoffed. To who, exactly? We're not just going to sit here and let them dictate terms. Dr. Lopez met his gaze. This isn't about sitting back. It's about recognizing the scale of what we're dealing with. These aliens could have wiped out the entire planet with the flick of a switch. Instead, they chose to make an example of a small faction of our own people. If we don't understand their power and their message, we might not get another chance. A heavy silence fell over the room. The implication of her words hung in the air like a cloud of smoke. This was not just about politics. It was about survival. Meanwhile, far beyond the reach of Earth's orbit, the alien ships remained, motionless but ever-present. No one knew how many ships were out there, or how advanced their technology was. All they knew was that the aliens had made their presence undeniable. And now, they were waiting. On one of these ships, a single figure watched the Earth through an observation window. It was not the first time they had observed humanity, but it was the first time they had intervened. The being's expression was unreadable, its form a blur of shimmering light that shifted with the gravity of the space around it. "We must be patient," the figure's voice reverberated in the chamber. It was neither male nor female, but something far beyond the concept of human gender. "They have much to learn, but they are capable. We will see if they are worthy." At the command station, a second figure turned, its light shifting into a more solid form. What if they do not understand the warning? What if they resist? The first figure did not respond immediately, staring into the void beyond the observation window, a place where Earth appeared as a pale blue dot, fragile and vulnerable. "Then we will act. But for now, we wait. Let their leaders decide." Back on Earth, the response to the alien warning was split. While the military and certain factions pushed for immediate retaliation, others, like Dr. Lopez and a growing group of global leaders, advocated for diplomacy and understanding. But no matter how hard the world tried to make sense of the aliens' actions, one truth became undeniable: Earth was not in control. Humanity was at a crossroads. President Turner knew that the next few days could change everything. She had spent countless hours deliberating with her advisors, trying to figure out what the next steps should be. The military was demanding action, they were ready to fight back, convinced that Earth's pride could not allow such an affront to go unchallenged. And yet, deep inside her, Turner felt a strange sense of caution. The aliens had not come to Earth as conquerors. They had come as protectors, offering a warning before action. But for what reason? What had they seen in humanity that made them care so much? "We have no choice," President Turner finally declared, standing up and turning to face the screen showing the fading images of the destroyed ships. "We will attempt contact. But we do so with the full understanding that we might not get a second chance." The room fell into uneasy silence as Turner's words sank in. They were crossing a line. There was no turning back now. As the global leaders prepared for their next move, the alien fleet watched, its presence undetected by most of Earth's population. The stakes were rising, and soon, humanity would have to make a choice: trust in the unknown, or face the unknown with defiance. The final warning had been given. The consequences had already begun. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of political maneuvering, military preparations, and secretive negotiations. Behind closed doors, world leaders tried to come to a consensus on how to approach the alien threat. Publicly, they portrayed a united front, insisting that humanity would not bow to threats, but privately, doubt gnawed at the hearts of even the most hardened leaders. Could they really stand up to such an advanced force, or was this an exercise in futility? On Earth, tensions were high. The first signals of communication with the aliens were planned. Earth had no idea what kind of language or technology the aliens possessed, but they knew the stakes. They had no way of predicting how the conversation would unfold, but they had one hope: to understand the message. In a darkened room deep within the United Nations headquarters, President Turner stood before a group of hand-picked experts and diplomats, waiting for the transmission from the alien fleet to begin. The table in front of her was covered with a mess of equipment: computers, communication devices, and satellite links all running in overdrive. Tension in the room was palpable. Everyone knew that this moment would determine the fate of the planet. "This is it," Dr. Lopez whispered under her breath. She had become the key negotiator, chosen for her expertise in alien biology and the little information they had about the aliens' behavior. A sharp beep echoed throughout the room as a transmission from the alien fleet appeared on the large screen. The feed was unlike anything anyone had ever seen. It was not a video call, rather, it was a strange display of shifting lights and patterns, symbols that could not be understood by any Earth technology. For a brief moment, no one moved. The room was silent, everyone waiting for something, anything, that might give them a clue as to how to proceed. Then, the screen began to change. The patterns twisted and shifted rapidly, like a living thing. It was clear that this was not some artificial message, this was something far more advanced, a method of communication that was beyond human comprehension. "It's beautiful," Dr. Lopez said quietly, her voice filled with awe. President Turner's brow furrowed. "What are they trying to tell us?" No one had an answer. The symbols flashed faster, the patterns weaving in and out of each other, each one more complex than the last. But there was something else, something that sent a shiver down everyone's spine. It was a sense of purpose in the alien communication, a feeling that they were being measured, scrutinized, as though the aliens were deciding whether humanity was worthy of their time. And then, as suddenly as it had started, the patterns halted. The screen flickered once and went black. "Was that a message?" General Calhoun asked, his voice edged with frustration. "I don't know," Dr. Lopez replied, her voice strained. "But I think we've just made the first move." Meanwhile, in the vast expanse of space, the alien fleet was watching, not just the Earth's response, but the response of humanity itself. They had expected confusion. They had expected fear. But what they hadn't anticipated was the slow, deliberate nature of humanity's decision-making process. There was something about the way the humans responded that intrigued them. They were not quick to act, nor were they inclined to make rash decisions. Instead, they measured their options, weighed their risks, and prepared themselves for the unknown. As the fleet waited, a figure stepped forward, its glowing form casting eerie shadows in the dim light of the command room. The being's voice was low and filled with authority, resonating with a quiet power that demanded attention. "They are beginning to understand. But their hesitation is evident. They are not ready to face the truth." Another figure, one that seemed to shimmer even more brightly than the others, spoke. "They will have to choose. In time, they will make their decision. But the question is, will they be strong enough to survive what is to come?" The first figure turned toward the window, its eyes fixed on Earth's fragile form, suspended in the void. "Humanity is young, but they are resilient. Their spirit is stronger than they know. And yet, their fate hangs in the balance. We will give them one more chance." Back on Earth, President Turner and her team were scrambling to interpret the strange transmission. What did it mean? The more they analyzed it, the less certain they became. "It's almost like, they're waiting for us to make the next move," Dr. Lopez remarked, her brow furrowed as she stared at the patterns. "But what do they expect?" "I don't know," Turner admitted. "But we can't afford to waste time. If they're truly testing us, we need to prove that we're worthy of this galaxy they're offering us. We need to show them that we're capable of standing with them." General Calhoun, ever the skeptic, crossed his arms. "And if we fail? What happens then?" "Let's not think about failure right now," Turner said, though her own voice wavered. "We have to succeed. For the future of humanity." That night, the world held its breath. The next transmission was scheduled, but it was unclear what form it would take. Would the aliens give another cryptic message? Or would they make their true intentions known? And in the back of President Turner's mind, a thought gnawed at her: what if the aliens were not testing humanity at all? What if the test was already over? What if Earth had failed before they even knew the game had begun? The fate of humanity hung in the balance, and the aliens were not the only ones watching. The world's future was now tied to a decision that no one could predict. The next day dawned heavy with uncertainty. The communication channels were silent, eerily so. Earth's leaders, having tried everything to establish a second contact, were now left with only one option: wait. They had no choice but to sit back and wonder, had they made a fatal mistake? President Turner paced the halls of the United Nations headquarters, her mind racing. What could have gone wrong? The first transmission had been a warning, a challenge. But now, as time passed and no further messages arrived, doubt crept in. Had humanity truly failed the test? Had the aliens already judged them unworthy? Meanwhile, across the globe, a sense of unease spread like wildfire. People had watched the initial transmissions with mixed emotions, some felt hope, others fear. But as the silence stretched on, fear grew stronger. Was the galaxy about to turn its back on Earth? In a small neighborhood on the outskirts of a major city, Elijah, a high school teacher, sat in front of his television, his eyes glued to the screen. He had been following the news about the alien transmissions since the beginning, but now, the uncertainty was gnawing at him. He had never thought much about humanity's place in the universe until the aliens arrived. Now, he wondered if the fate of the entire world rested on the shoulders of a few leaders who were clueless about what to do next. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. He opened it to find his neighbor, an elderly man named Mr. Rivers, standing with a paper in his hand. Have you heard the latest? Mr. Rivers asked, his voice low with concern. Elijah shook his head. No, nothing new. Just more waiting. The old man handed him the paper. It was an editorial from a major news outlet, and its headline screamed across the page, "Earth's fate is in our hands. Will humanity rise to the challenge or fall into irrelevance?" Elijah scanned the article quickly, then looked up at Mr. Rivers. It's not just about waiting. They're wondering if we're even capable of handling the truth. What if we're too fractured, too afraid, to unite under the pressure? Mr. Rivers shook his head slowly, his face drawn with concern. I don't know, son. But this might be our last chance. We don't have the luxury of second chances. Back at the United Nations, the pressure was reaching unbearable levels. The global community, fractured and anxious, needed answers. President Turner gathered the world's leaders in a secret meeting, determined to make a decision, to act before the silence stretched on too long. I think we've waited long enough, President Turner said, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. We can't just wait for them to send another signal. If they've sent their message, it's time for us to show them who we are. We can't sit here and let them decide our fate. General Calhoun leaned forward, his eyes narrowed. But how do we prove that we're worthy? We don't even know what they want from us. I think that's the point, Dr. Lopez said, her voice surprisingly calm. We can't expect a perfect answer. The point is, we need to show them we're ready. We need to prove that we're more than just a fractured world, that we can come together and do something great. It was at that moment that the second transmission came through. The screen flickered to life, and once again, the strange, shifting symbols appeared. But this time, something was different. There was a message hidden in the patterns, one that the experts immediately began to decode. One by one, the symbols morphed into recognizable shapes. A symbol of peace, a symbol of unity. And then, at the center of it all, a single word appeared, one that was unmistakably clear: together. The room went still. President Turner exhaled slowly. That's it. They want to see if we can come together. They're not asking for perfection, they're asking if we can unite for something greater than ourselves. Dr. Lopez nodded, a small smile forming on her face. We've got one shot. We need to act now. In the following days, world leaders rallied together. The factions that had once been divided over political ideology, resources, and borders began to find common ground. The aliens had shown them what they needed to do: unite or perish. The decision to act was not easy, but the sheer weight of the moment, of the entire planet's future hanging by a thread, drove humanity to put aside their differences, even if just for a time. The Earth's message to the aliens was simple, but profound: we will stand together. In small corners of the globe, people like Elijah and Mr. Rivers began to see the changes in the world around them. News broadcasts shifted tone. Governments, once hesitant to make bold moves, now openly sought cooperation. Every small act of unity became a beacon of hope, and every citizen, every worker, felt the weight of their responsibility in ensuring humanity's survival. For the first time in centuries, the people of Earth began to feel like they were truly united. Humanity's message had been sent, but the moment of truth was still to come. Would the alien civilization receive their efforts with favor, or would they see it as just another sign of human fragility? The weight was unbearable. President Turner stood before the world, her face set in determination. The message they had sent was simple yet profound, but now the real test began. Earth's leaders had done all they could. They had united, had shown their willingness to work together, but the true test of their efforts lay in the hands of the aliens. The world's eyes were fixed on the communication screens. Each nation, each individual, waited for the next signal, the moment that would decide their fate. For all the progress they had made, the reality of the situation loomed like a shadow. Had they done enough? Or would they be judged unworthy of the galactic community? Elijah had never felt the weight of the world so heavily as he did now. After the broadcast, he'd returned to his humble classroom, trying to maintain a sense of normalcy, but his thoughts were consumed by the events unfolding across the globe. The world had changed, and his role in it, his purpose, had shifted. He was no longer just a teacher, he was part of something greater, something unimaginable. One evening, he gathered his students for a special class. The news had been filled with updates about the impending alien decision, but Elijah knew there was something more important he had to do. "The world is waiting for answers," Elijah began, his voice steady but filled with the weight of the moment. "But what happens now, after the message has been sent, is up to each of us. It's up to us to decide what kind of world we want to build." The students looked up at him, confused but engaged. Elijah smiled. "It's not enough just to hope for a good outcome. We have to believe in the change we've started. No matter what happens, we can't go back to what we were before." The alien message wasn't just about them. It was about us. It was about showing that we can do better, be better. He paused, letting his words sink in. His class of high school students, a mix of backgrounds, races, and beliefs, looked at him with wide eyes. In that moment, Elijah realized something: this wasn't just a lesson for his students. It was a lesson for him, too. They were all, together, facing the unknown. And they were ready for it. Meanwhile, the leaders of Earth gathered in a vast meeting hall, anxiously awaiting the alien response. It was a moment of supreme uncertainty. The entire planet had come together, and yet, no one knew if that would be enough to pass the test. President Turner sat at the head of the table, her fingers tapping nervously on the surface. General Calhoun, standing by her side, watched the screens with a hardened gaze. The tension in the room was palpable. Every leader, every representative, sat in silence, awaiting the answer to the question that weighed so heavily on their minds: would the aliens accept their united front? Then, the transmission flickered to life. The alien symbols flashed on the screen once again, but this time, they were different. Instead of chaotic patterns, the symbols were orderly, almost serene. It was as if the aliens were taking their time to craft the message. The tension in the room grew unbearable. The symbols slowly shifted, rearranged themselves, and finally, the message became clear. The words appeared: "Humanity, you have passed the first test." A collective sigh of relief swept across the room, but President Turner's relief was tempered by the reality of what came next. The message continued: "But you have only just begun. Your future will be shaped by the choices you make now. Will you live up to the promise of your unity, or will it falter under pressure?" The alien transmission ended abruptly, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. Elijah sat in his living room, watching the broadcast as the message was relayed. He wasn't surprised by the outcome. Passing the first test was a sign of progress, but it wasn't the end. No, the aliens had made it clear: humanity still had a long way to go. The question lingered in Elijah's mind: could they keep up the momentum? Could they continue working together, not just for survival, but for a better future? As the transmission ended, Elijah stood up from his couch, a fire igniting inside him. This was no longer just about passing tests or gaining approval from some otherworldly force. This was about humanity's chance to rewrite the course of history. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was possible. Across the world, people like Elijah were beginning to see the gravity of the challenge ahead. The aliens had given them a taste of what was to come. Humanity had shown that they were capable of unity, but that was only step one. Now, the real work began. What would they do with this second chance? The world was holding its breath. No one knew how long it would take for the aliens to test them again. But one thing was clear: humanity had learned an important lesson. Their journey was far from over, but the test they had passed, the test of unity, was just the beginning. The aliens had set the bar high, but they had also given Earth something priceless, a chance to prove themselves not just to the aliens, but to each other. The question now was, could they rise to the occasion? Humanity's second test had been set in motion. The message from the aliens echoed through every home on Earth: will you live up to the promise of your unity, or will it falter under pressure? The weight of those words bore down on every leader, every citizen, and every individual. The world had passed the first test, but the next challenge was waiting, an even harder test of humanity's resolve. Elijah sat in his modest apartment, his mind racing. The entire planet had been watching as the alien message was broadcast, and now, the true battle began. No one had expected it to be easy, but the way ahead seemed daunting. How could they maintain their unity in the face of inevitable division? How would the promise of a united humanity withstand the inevitable trials and pressures that would come? Across the globe, countries were facing internal strife. There were whispers of dissent, old rivalries creeping back into the spotlight. Some nations were questioning the need for cooperation. What had started as a hopeful vision of a unified world was starting to show cracks. The weight of the unknown, of the aliens' expectations, was causing fear to rise in places it had never existed before. President Turner sat at her desk, staring at the report on her screen. The image of a world divided was reflected in the data: riots in some countries, protests in others. People were tired. They were scared. The promise of peace was faltering. Could humanity really prove itself? General Calhoun, she said, her voice steady but filled with worry. What happens if we fail the next test? What happens if we lose this fragile unity? The general stood beside her, silent for a moment before answering. We can't afford to fail, Madam President. If we do, the aliens will see us as a broken species. Not just in their eyes, but in our own. This unity was never just for the aliens. It was for us. We have to hold it together, or we lose everything. In a school in a bustling city, Elijah's students were discussing the impact of the alien message. They were all old enough to understand what was at stake, and their eyes reflected a mixture of hope and fear. Elijah had expected them to react with excitement and curiosity, but instead, he saw doubt, frustration, and uncertainty. One student, a bright young girl from a small town, stood up, her voice shaking. Do you really think we can keep it together? It's not just about fighting the aliens anymore. It's about fighting ourselves. All the old divisions are coming back. How are we supposed to stop that? How can we keep believing when everything's falling apart? Elijah didn't know how to answer at first. He was just as uncertain as she was, but then he remembered what he had told his class before, that their unity wasn't just a message to the aliens, it was a message to themselves. This wasn't just about survival, it was about growth. Do you know why we came together in the first place? Elijah asked, his voice calm but firm. It wasn't because of the aliens. It was because we realized we couldn't go on fighting each other. The world is bigger than our divisions. It always has been. The student sat back down, her eyes still uncertain, but there was a spark of understanding. Elijah's words weren't a guarantee of success, but they were a reminder: unity wasn't just about agreeing with everyone, it was about working through differences for something greater. The global situation was growing more tense by the day. The test had begun. The pressure was mounting, and humanity's greatest challenge was unfolding before their eyes. Would they keep the promise of unity, or would fear and division tear them apart? Across a war-torn region, a group of soldiers gathered in a darkened room. They were from different countries, different backgrounds, but the alien message had united them under one common goal: to face the unknown together. I don't know how much longer we can hold on, one of the soldiers said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. The higher-ups are already making plans to go their separate ways if things get too bad. I just don't know if we can hold this together. Another soldier, a veteran of countless conflicts, shook his head. If we go back to that, we lose everything. What we've built here, what we've fought for, it's worth more than the old rivalries. We can't let them win. But the doubts were there. There was fear, and there was anger. There were old wounds that had never healed. The thought of facing an unknown alien force was terrifying, but the real threat was the one within themselves. Could humanity really unite in the face of such fear? As the pressure reached a breaking point, a strange thing began to happen. Despite the fear, despite the panic, there were glimmers of hope. People from different walks of life, from different nations, began to rally together. Small acts of kindness, of cooperation, were beginning to spark. It was clear that the road ahead would be difficult, but humanity had learned something invaluable in their short time of unity. It was possible to come together, even in the darkest of times. Elijah, too, began to see it in his classroom. It wasn't just about the aliens. It wasn't just about the tests. It was about something more personal, about what it meant to believe in each other, to stand by one another when the world seemed to be falling apart. That belief, however fragile, was the one thing that could carry them through. And yet, as they moved toward the unknown, the question still lingered: could they survive the next test? Could they prove that their unity was not just a fleeting moment of hope but a lasting legacy? The world's future hung in the balance, and humanity's resolve was being tested like never before. The aliens had given them a chance, but now they had to prove they were worthy of it. The next challenge would be their defining moment. Would they rise to the occasion, or would they falter? The world had braced itself for the final trial, but no one could have predicted how it would unfold. The aliens' message had been clear: humanity's unity would be tested, and failure to prove it could lead to catastrophic consequences. As the last remnants of doubt and division were pushed to the forefront, the final trial had arrived, not as a battle of force, but of spirit. Elijah had never felt more uncertain in his life. The weight of the world's expectations, the promise of peace that had been so fragile in the face of old fears, everything was on the line now. As humanity prepared for what was to come, he couldn't help but wonder if they were truly ready. In his classroom, the students had gathered again, but this time, it wasn't about the alien message or the tests. They were discussing something else, something far more pressing. A sense of quiet dread had filled the room. The news from the global leaders was clear: time was running out. Unity had faltered, cracks had begun to show, and the consequences of failure were growing ever closer. But Elijah's role was not just as a teacher, it was as a reminder of what humanity could be when it worked together. His voice trembled with a mix of fear and hope as he addressed his students. We've been given a chance, a gift, a warning. The aliens aren't here to judge us, they're here to see if we can rise above ourselves. But this is our test. Our trial. Will we prove that we're more than our fears, more than our divisions? One of the students, a boy who had been skeptical all along, spoke up. But what if we fail? What if it's too late? Elijah looked at him, eyes filled with a deep, quiet resolve. The only way we truly fail is if we stop trying. We may stumble, but we have the power to get back up. We've already shown the world that we can do something extraordinary, together. The final test is not just about holding on to what we have. It's about believing in the possibility of something better. Elsewhere in the world, governments were scrambling to find common ground. Negotiations had reached an all-time high, and leaders from every nation were working tirelessly to avoid war. But something had changed. Where there had once been isolation, there was now a new sense of collaboration, even in the face of desperation. The aliens had watched it all unfold, and the humans weren't blind to it. They were being watched, yes, but they were also learning. In a remote military base, General Calhoun stood with his staff, the weight of the world hanging on their decisions. They knew the pressure was mounting. With each passing day, the stakes grew higher. "Sir," one of the officers said nervously, "the situation is deteriorating." We've received word that some factions are already making plans to break off, to abandon the effort. If we don't act soon. General Calhoun held up a hand, his face a study in resolve. We're not just holding the line. We're pushing forward. The aliens gave us a chance, this is what we've been waiting for. This is our moment. The officer nodded, but the tension was palpable. Humanity had reached a precipice, and the only way forward was together. As the deadline loomed, Elijah found himself at a crossroads. His role in the grand scheme of things had never been more crucial. It wasn't just about teaching history or science anymore, it was about teaching the most important lesson of all, unity. He received an urgent message that would change everything. A final broadcast was scheduled by the alien leadership. The aliens had been observing every moment of the test. They knew what humanity was capable of, but they had remained silent, waiting for the final act to unfold. Now, they would make their judgment. The announcement rang out over every screen on Earth. The message was simple, yet it resonated deeply with every listener. We have watched. We have waited. Humanity has faced its test. The outcome is clear. Your unity has been proven. You have shown that even in your darkest hour, you are capable of coming together. The final trial is not of strength, but of heart. You have passed. A wave of disbelief, then joy, swept over the planet. The impossible had been achieved. Against all odds, humanity had faced its greatest challenge and emerged victorious. The aliens, once perceived as distant and cold, now stood as witnesses to something humanity had never dared to dream, a future where unity could overcome even the darkest divides. But as the celebration spread across the world, Elijah knew something deeper had occurred. The true test wasn't the aliens, it had always been within humanity itself. Had they truly learned the lesson? He stood at the window, watching as the world began to embrace its newfound peace. And as he watched the people, from all walks of life, come together in celebration, he realized the lesson that would stay with him for the rest of his days. The greatest strength lies not in what we can do alone, but in what we can accomplish together. Humanity had passed the test. Not because they had fought to survive, but because they had learned to fight for each other. They had learned that unity, forged in the fires of adversity, was their true strength. And that was the lesson they would carry forward into the stars.